Episode 200, The Science of Conflict. What's up, folks? Justin Garcia, a.k.a. Master Chim, and welcome to another episode of The Pressure Project. Today, we have in studio good friend of the podcast, brother of mine, Tom KIER from Sayoc Technical Group. Say hi to listeners, my friend.
How you guys doing?
And we have a pretty special episode planned for you guys. As is usually the case with Pat and I, we usually have the episode before the episode. Before this, it was the episode that needed to be stopped like violently so we could begin this episode. Because as is the case when we all get together, this is what we love to do. You know, and I like to think at this point we're pretty good at it. And a lot of great, powerful things have come out of these talks. And that's what we have planned for you guys today. Also in studio, we have White Boy Pat and another STG brother. We have Enrique and Reyes. Enrique Reyes, he's Mexican. And we're getting all of that stuff out. One of the things we wanted to make sure of, and I'm pretty open with you guys. You guys know I don't hold anything back. We didn't want to be here talking and try to ignore the two guys standing or sitting looking at us for 2 hours. Yeah. So, housekeeping though, let's get that out of the way. So we have thepressureproject.com as our website. Info at thepressureproject.com is our contact email. Thepressureprojectmembers.com is our membership site. Check that out. Okay, so today we're also doing something different. Aside from having you here, you know, at the desk, aside from it being episode 200, we're also going to do our first two-part episode. Now, not two-part in terms of release part of it today, part of it the next time, but the second half of this episode is going to be in the members site only. So yes, you all love to hate when I say stuff like that, but it is what it is, and membership has its privileges, right? We're gonna get over or get through some stuff today that I think it's absolutely paramount when studying conflict. And there's things that, you know, I've had the privilege of being exposed to from Tom. It's things that have motivated me to pursue studying these things off of my own, which is obviously what our intentions are for you guys today. But it's one of those things where I've seen, you know, Tom teach this to some special groups, some special rooms of some special men, time and time again. And it's one of those things when Tom agreed to do this for the episode, I knew it had to be a special episode. So I knew it would be episode 200. And I've been hounding him to get up here to secure this and making it happen. Yeah. So we're going to cover the OODA loop today. Yep. You know, Colonel John Boyd's OODA loop. We're going to be covering in the second hour Sayoc's readiness formula. Mm-hmm. We're going to be covering, knowing you and me when we have our conversations, probably 100 other things, mm-hmm. All relevant, and they will all be tied in.
Yep.
And I am super excited that we're able to do this, you know, here, you know, on location. No, this is in studio. How do you say that, Pat?
In studio.
Pat said in studio. I feel so. It's like he's over there. He's in our studio audience.
100%.
So 100%, he said. So that's just proof that I didn't kill Pat, because this is like the second or third episode that he's not in front of the camera. So Pat's still alive, guys. So now another thing, and this is important. Those of you that are listening to the audio, you are going to be slightly at a handicap because there is going to be a visual component to some of this stuff. Now, I have in front of me John Boyd's OODA formula, and it is not a simple pie chart. It's not a simple, you know, diagram. It's something that is intricate, but I feel very easily understood at the end of, you know, the explanation and description of it. But there are going to be visual components where I'll have Pat put some graphics up on the screen so you guys can see exactly what we're talking about. So if you are listening to this, follow as best you can. I will certainly make it consumable for you. You're certainly not at a loss if you're just listening to it. But if you listen to the audio, I would implore you to go back and watch the video so you could see our two handsome mugs along with the graphics that we put up. All right, so Tom, the OODA loop. What is the OODA loop?
The OODA loop is a decision formula that John Boyd developed in the 70s, and for the guys who don't know Boyd or know his background, he was a military guy, a flyer, had a long history as a pilot, and also really as a thinker in the military circles and strategic level thinker. And one of his most, really that he's known for, one of the things he's known for is the OODA loop. And the OODA loop is just his description of how people move about through the environment, how they manipulate the environment, how they control things that they can control, their whole process for this cycle. And he breaks it down into 4 different components: the observe component, the orient component, the decide, and the act.
Hence OODA.
OODA, right? OODA. The observation phase of it is pulling data in through our senses, having a just kind of pulling in information in however we can do that. The understanding what that information does for us, how we can use the information, is the orient phase. Is how am I able to use this information? How does it affect me? All of the things that go into the analysis of that data that gets pulled in through the observations. These things are affected by my biases, things that in the orient part of it, I have previous experiences, patterns that I've been through, the way I analyze things, my process.
Let me interject for a second. So we have OODA, 4 components: observe, orient, decide, and act. Now, I've seen after, and this is, I'm playing, let's feed a scenario so we could discuss it. But I've seen you give this talk countless times. Every single time I learn something new, I learn or establish a deeper understanding of one of the components. But I've seen these videos online, and I've seen people deal with this. Some of them adequately. I've also seen some terrible renditions of this, who say, OODA, observe, orient, decide, act. They present it as this sort of linear transaction. And I just interjected as you were going over the components of each, because there are components of each one of these things that have different relationships. Right?
Yeah. One of the key things is all those different aspects within each of the 4, and then the feedback loops that are found within that loop as well. And that's what most people don't explain completely. It becomes a little too complicated, or they don't understand it themselves. And that is what we see. And a lot of people look at it as a checklist. All right, I observe, then I orientate myself through those observations of the information I get. Then I make a decision, then I act, and I just keep doing that. And in simple terms, that's what you do.
Right.
But when we analyze it, it's a little more complex than that. Right. And a lot of people just stop with that simple thing, and they don't even necessarily understand the 4 things correctly, the 4 areas. They don't really understand what we mean by observe. A lot of people think observe means seeing, like just with my eyes. Orientating, I've heard people describe it as positioning themselves within the environment, almost like direction, like facing a certain direction, which is ridiculous.
Which is action.
Which is an action. And then, so as soon as I hear some subject matter expert begin to talk about it, and I start to hear these things come out, I'm just like, man, I have to do something on this, because
Well, I kind of prodded you too.
Yes.
I remember, Pat and I had this list of, of like topics in the queue. And the OODA loop would always come up, and I go, nope, we need 2 on top for that. Nope. Every time it'd come up, nope, knock it to the back of the list. Yeah. We need 2 on top for that. Because I knew I needed you to be here. One of the things I want to do now, and this is for the people who are watching the video, we're going to put up Boyd's OODA loop diagram, right? So we'll get that up there now. So they're seeing right now what this is.
Right.
Let's go one at a time through, and we'll cover one of the components. Mm-hmm. Let them see it right now. So right now, let's go over observe.
Right.
Right. So remove that. Watch my magic.
Awesome.
Pat will take care of that later.
That's pretty awesome.
So we're on observe.
Right.
Let's go over how we can observe.
Right. So observation is just pulling in data from the world. All of your senses obviously can be used for observation. Some people in some situations will be dominant in certain senses. I think for the most part we're visual animals, but there's a lot of things that you can't get through sight alone. And but just the raw data that we can bring in is basically the observation phase. Now, it's constantly unfolding. As we're seeing stuff, we're not looking at a still picture. We're looking at something moving. So as we are observing, things are changing. The speed at which they change as we observe it can cause us to kind of hold on to that observation longer until we feel that we've seen what we need to see, or we've gathered the information that we need to gather. And that goes through a short loop here where for me to assess whether or not I've seen what I need to see, I have to run it through some of the other processes before I've now completed that. I have a outside information. I have things that are unfolding within the environment, things that I'm interacting with as I'm observing it. So I can change things as I'm observing it. Me being there can change the observation or change what's going on. So all this stuff needs to be understood, the complexity of just the observation phase, and that's probably the simplest.
Right. And I'll also, reiterate to you listeners how important it is to understand that this is a universal formula, which means it's applied to almost everything. Mm-hmm. So, we think in terms of, we illustrate these concepts with examples of conflict and movement and, keeping it relevant, to the science of conflict, the topic for today. But it's also important to understand, conceptually, once you have this, it's something that could be applied endlessly in so many areas of your life. Right?
Absolutely. In everything that we do, as we move about or move through the world, this is happening, if not consciously. Any one of these parts can have a conscious component to it. For the most part, it's happening on a subconscious level. Mm. And the entire thing can happen very quickly. So this entire loop could happen in a quarter of a second.
Right.
So I also see some people out there in the on the World Wide Web,
right.
and they are explaining these things as if, of course, we don't actually do this because it would take too long to do this. Really looking at it more like each one of these is a constant, almost like a conscious boxes that are checked.
Like a step,
list. Steps
that need to be followed in order.
And and really not looking at the subconscious processes, the feedback loops, and all those other things. So, that's another thing that needs to be understood is this is running all the time. Right. Everything that we're doing, every action, everything that if you're looking to pick this up, there's got to be an entire OODA loop just for that process.
Right. You're carrying a bag, and suddenly the ground underneath you becomes unsteady and slippery. you're holding the bag, you're balancing the bag, you're also compensating for what's happening subconsciously underneath your feet.
Right.
So these things cannot be looked at in a linear sort of sense.
Right. And so it's not as simple as maybe people would like to put it out. Maybe a teacher wants to just get the idea out there and puts it out there very simply. But he really should reinforce that this is a simple version of a much more complex,
right,
series of events.
The framework. He's introducing the framework.
Right.
So let's move on to orient.
Right.
Right. So now going back to the diagram, right, there it is.
Yep.
It's my magic again. We see a symbol here, which obviously means Satanism.
Right.
Right.
That's the key part. To avoid OODA.
Satan, sell your soul. No. So it's a 5-pointed star, right? So throwing that away, I'm throwing it over your shoulder now.
That's good.
All right. So here we are, orient.
Right. So as we look at the orientation part of this cycle, Boyd put in a number of things that he thought would be filters or biases or things that would affect how we plug ourselves into what we observe. How is this going to affect me? How can I use this information? All the data is coming in. Basically, the analysis part of that data where I take it and pull out the valuable stuff, throw the stuff that's not valuable away, how I chunk the information, the how it will be used, value structures are put on things. And, our cultural traditions, our previous experiences, information that's steadily coming in from my observation. These things all go into the orientation phase and affect how we push things into the decision cycle, which is the next part. So it's not just a simple, where am I in the space here? In this 3-dimensional space, where am I sitting?
Right.
And it certainly isn't an action of orientating myself a certain way.
Right. Which
is
we know it's
childish.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, let's go over these. Give me an example now. Cultural traditions. How does cultural traditions affect the orientation component of the OODA loop?
Right. So cultural traditions, there are things which we are taught at a very young age, we grow up with. There are biases, prejudices that we have. And when you see something, even on an unconscious level, you observe something becomes apparent to you, and you have an immediate bias one way or the other. You can filter that as being important or not important. And a lot of those filters can be based on cultural traditions. It can be based on previous experiences, things that negatively or positively affected you in the past, and all of a sudden you value these observations more or less. And that's why observation in and of itself is just data being pulled in. Really, your situational awareness is going to be how you value that data, like what's important in there, and that's your orientation phase. Right. Is that awareness phase.
So it's knowing, like, just to get some more examples out there. I'm walking down the street. I see a man walking on the same side of the sidewalk as I am. I look at him. I run through, my previous experiences, and I get a handle on what's happening right now. And I deem him a non-threat. I deem him insignificant, and I walk by him without giving him another thought. Whereas somebody else may resemble somebody who they've had some sort of conflict with, whatever it is. Or maybe, let's say he, this is a Jewish man walking down the block, curly cues and everything. I don't know what they call. What are they called, Pat? Ishkabibbles. See, Pat's here. They're called Ishkabibbles.
Really?
So I thought they were curly cues. That's what we call. So they have the curls. They're walking down the block, and they have a Muslim walking up the block, and it means something different to him.
Cultural enemies,
right? Culturally. Yeah. So this is what you mean, right? This is how these different things can affect how different people could orient themselves differently based on these different filters.
Right. So when we look at orient, we really want to look at how does this affect me? This is data. I'm pulling in observations. How does that affect me? How am I related to that? How does this change what's going on? And that's when he says orient. That's what he means by that.
Right. Okay. So now the decision component, right? That leg of the race. We've observed. We've brought this information in. We've decided how this information affects us. And we've decided to push this now towards our decision phase of the OODA loop. What happens there?
So at this point, we're formulating or have formulated a plan and a very quick, short, in some cases, hypothesis on what should be done. There are feedback loops that are done just mentally. In other words, the testing of this decision can go back through a mental observation. You observe kind of, if I do this,
right,
in my mind's eye, I observe what happens.
Right.
I push that through my orientation cycle. I run it through everything that I have there, and I come back. And that feedback, I have another decision. It may be the same or it may have changed. This all can happen very quickly. But we do these kind of mental tests, and that's where that feedback loop goes back into. If I've decided to go ahead with that, I would push it, I would feed forward to an action.
Right.
Everything that I'm described can happen in a fraction of a second.
You're about to hit somebody, but through the corner of your eye, you see a police cruiser.
Right. Right.
Now, everything the person in front of you has done, you've told yourself hitting him is an answer, but given new information,
right,
you sort of press that fast forward in your mind's eye, like you said,
yep,
no, I do this, I'm locked up.
Yep.
I got to take the rent money, I got to pay to bail me out. My wife's got to bring the kids to the precinct, Yep. I may have thought about these things before in the past.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
But this is what you're talking about now?
Absolutely. And if this feedback loop is not intact, or you feel time constraints where you don't give this feedback loop chance to happen, these feedback loops can represent second and third order effects of what you're doing.
Right.
And they may or may not be in place. They may or may not be used. You may end up acting before you've run all those second and third order effect kind of feedback loops.
As many people do.
All the time.
Right.
All the time. And, because as you run that feedback loop, the observation now becomes a mental observation. It goes back into orientation and then previous experiences. I got locked up before when I hit this guy.
Right.
When I hit a guy. This is a similar situation. And whatever they may be. And then that changes the decision. And this feedback loop can happen a bunch. But it's very important that, when we see simple diagrams of the OODA loop, of Boyd's cycle, a lot of times they don't have those feedback loops in. And really, these are, to me, the most important parts. Is not the actual cycle itself, but all of the feedback loops and the implicit guidance and control cycles that happen in very compressed time and very,
right,
serious situations.
So before we start getting into the implicit guidance and controls,
right,
let's get through decide, right, the decision part,
mm-hmm,
and now let's enter into the action phase.
Right.
So now we've gone through to almost look at it in the linear terms that we don't feel that should be presented in its entirety, but just to illustrate the process in one cycle. We've taken information in the observation,
yep,
component. We've decided, based on all of these different filters and biases, what this information means to us. Based on information, we decided, what course of action we should take, and now we're going to actually act. How does the action get processed?
Right. So the action itself can be looked at and observed. How things begin to change based on that action. So I had a mental model, if I ran my feedback loops, of what was going to happen. Does the actual reality match that mental model? If it does, my loop becomes very fast and clean. If it doesn't, it loops. I almost interrupt my own loop. Something happens that I wasn't planning to happen, and as a result of my actions, this now changes my confidence level. How people deal with varying confidence levels is their feedback loops become increased in length or number, so that they double and triple check themselves before they begin to move on. And so there's a number of reasons that may happen, but in the action phase, obviously we're constantly observing. All these things are happening all the time, and overlapping each other in some cases. And in some cases, we cut out pieces completely. Mm. But partially the action phase is one of the drivers of that, because that is our first test for what we thought was going to happen. If the test is yep, that's what I thought, just continue to punch him. Right. Like, that was good, punch him to the ground. Whatever it is. And then it becomes a very quick cycle, because we don't do as much orientation and decision anymore. We go right from observations to actions, and we just repeat. Just keep punching him until he's done. Because
we don't allow for as much observation once we get into that role.
Yeah, the orientation and the decision tree becomes very simple, and we go into a just kind of rinse and repeat kind of thing. And this can happen for a couple of reasons. One is a successful action in which now just repeat it, or a loss of observation, a loss of, in other words, it was unsuccessful. We begin to get fed rather than be the feeder. We begin to receive, and we can no longer observe at the level that we want to make good decisions. Our orientation is also lost. When we realize that we can't observe, everything begins to break down from there. So
let me put in real quick. So now this is now getting into the diagram we had discussed earlier.
Right.
And I want you to explain that connection between how this ties into the feeder-receiver concept that we have spoken about, the Sayoc concept of feeder-receiver that we've spoken about at great lengths on the podcast before.
Right.
So
the feeder-receiver, if you look at two separate loops, so the feeder is running a loop, the receiver is running a loop.
OODA loops, two separate OODA loops.
Yep, two separate OODA loops. And one thing that designates a feeder versus a receiver is one is driving what's happening. The feeder is driving the course of events. And his actions in time start the event. So his loop, his observation, orientation, decision is already done. It starts with his action. So just picture two guys are face to face. One guy punches the other guy. The guy who did the punching started the show. His OODA loop, he's already at the end of it. He's in the action phase of it. The receiver basically observes through either impact, through vision, through sound, him getting punched. So he begins his phase or his loop in the observation phase while the feeder is already in the action phase. Now, if that action was successful and he tests it, he looks at the interaction with the environment and the feedback loop, and then he just cycles again. Cycle, and kind of saying, cycle until you see this. Like that.
So he's feeding the receiver his observation.
Yes. He's in control of what he observes. And a lot of times his manipulation of that is how the game is won or lost.
Right.
So it's his ability to control what he observes or keep him from observing certain things. That's the classical sucker punch, right? So
Right.
it's the ambush. It's the they're going to start on our action. We're all already a loop ahead of them. If our action was successful, we will interrupt their feedback loops so that they don't know which end is up. They don't know, where they're facing.
They never get to complete a cycle.
They never. We interrupt their cycle. So they understand that their decisions become very simple. They go into a guidance control, an implicit guidance and control kind of action, which is a loop, which is observation or lack of sufficient observations, right into action, which is a lot of times it's inaction.
So to now illustrate that, using fighting, it's the easiest common.
It is an easy
thing.
way to look at it. Yep.
Somebody gets hit before they get a chance to process a complete loop. They get hit again.
Yes.
Next thing you know, they're never getting a chance to complete an OODA loop of their own to determine their own action.
Right.
And they wind up just basically shutting down, covering up, and fetal position.
Yep.
So now that is an example of the implicit guidance and control.
Yeah, where they no longer really go through an orientation phase or a decision phase. That's already done. And they're just running the same thing over and over again. So it can happen with someone who's being successful or not successful, where they just go into, all right, rinse and repeat, like standing fetal position, cover up on the ground. Anyone who's ever done any boxing, like if you can make that guy turn around,
right,
face away from me,
right,
you've now overrun his loop. He no longer is even looking at what's going on.
Right.
He's not. He is observing a basic impact, but he's not reacting. There's no orientation to the stimulus.
Right.
He's not. He doesn't. Or he seems. It's a very simple reaction.
He almost chooses a different observation.
Yeah.
Right?
A different. Yeah. The decision becomes not based on anything other than default.
Right.
It's like you've peeled the onion back all the way to the very core.
Right.
And this is it. He's got no skills left. He's got no good reactions left. He basically, you peel him back to when he was a baby.
Right.
We've peeled him to a baby, and now we just beat the baby. Like that's how it works.
That'll be a quote. Now we just beat the baby.
Because that's what we're doing. There's no good reactions.
Right. So with my fighters, one of the things that I do, and this is, and I can't stress to your listeners enough. I've told you on plenty of occasions how much this has raised the sophistication of my training for my guys, for myself. But specific to like my MMA, my active MMA competitors, one of the things we do is we do a drill where if you are overwhelmed, we have a combination that we've already pre-trained, pre-installed.
Right.
And no matter where the guy is, no matter what the guy is doing, this is what we're going to do, trying to break his pattern and earn the right to begin our own feeding.
Yeah. Yeah. Right? And that's a great way to look at it. Without putting that stopgap in, the guy gets peeled all the way back to a completely unskilled baby. So what happens is there's a layer that is this is just going to happen automatically. When you get to this layer in the onion, this happens. And it's already thought out. It has a high percentage of being effective in this situation. The orientation and the observation orientation is at a minimum that we don't need a lot. The direction that he's in. And we're going to start cycling this combination. And the footwork will be this. And we cycle this combination and get out and whatever it is. That is put in there to take the place of an untrained response.
Right.
And that's what we need, because that person will eventually peel you back till you get untrained.
And it's really, it's the same process. It's just different, content,
Right.
it's the, and you see this all the time in MMA where you have the wrestler, right? So one of the things that happens in MMA all the time is you have these stud wrestlers who's wrestled their entire lives, but then they take some boxing and Muay Thai classes,
Right.
and now they're boxers and Muay Thai fighters.
Right.
But as soon as that bell gets wrong, there goes the double leg button.
That's it.
Tito
Double leg
Ortiz
button.
was
Yes.
notorious for it.
Right.
As soon as you hit him, he's a wrestler.
Yeah,
again.
you've peeled him back to
Right.
the wrestler.
Exactly right.
And if you hit him some more, you can peel him back to the baby. But
Right.
the thing is, if the wrestler is real strong, that may actually help him.
Right.
Like you peel him back, you get double legged, and all of a sudden he's okay again.
Right.
Then he gets back up and thinks that he's a Thai boxer, which he fails at, or whatever. But the thing is, can we put something in, or is something already in place
Right.
that we can use for that? And without really understanding the loop, Boyd cycle, and looking at it with all the nuances, you don't even plan that in your fight training. Like you could talk to another MMA coach, and they wouldn't even know what you're talking about. Like they don't study this. They're like, now they may have an idea of like, hey, if you're in trouble, just do this and get out. But
An application.
But they don't understand why they have it. How does it work? And there's nuances to all of that. So, this will help people really start to plan their training.
It solves problems.
Yeah.
So one of the things I find myself constantly in when dealing with different fighters, with different skill sets, different games, different opponents, right? So all these variables, if I don't have, the universals, of which the OODA loop is one, a significant one, if I don't have this, I'm reduced to experience. I'm reduced to what I've observed that has worked before will work again.
Your gut feeling.
Right. I can't figure it out.
Right.
I'm not writing a math problem down and finding
right.
the answer.
That's right.
Which is why this is so powerful. So I want to talk about now in the OODA loop. You've mentioned it earlier, and I want to talk about it a little bit more. Chunking.
Yeah.
Chunking is how we become more efficient.
Right.
Can you explain what that is?
So really what we want to think about here is complexity and how that affects our decision making and how it affects the loop. If we have too many things to observe for us to be very quick in making decisions, because I'm not done observing. There's only so many things I can observe in this much time, and I'm still observing, and I have stalled a lot of the loop has gotten dragged down, or begin to lag because of that. And I'm trying to observe everything, or I'm putting value on things. When I get to the orientation phase, I am valuing things that don't really have value, and there's too many of them, and I'm spending too much time on it. My decision becomes a complex decision. I have too many choices. This whole thing gets streamlined by chunking and simplifying, taking something that's complex and having a better understanding of value for each individual item, and actually either putting things together into groups or excluding things from my list of things that I need to think about. And then what happens is I begin to make the loop much more streamlined, more efficient.
So you gave me a great example earlier about chunking with driving. Can you share that with them?
Yeah. So it's a complex action, driving down the street in your car. If you were to look at all the things that you're monitoring, there's pedals on the floor, there's a steering mechanism, you're looking at a windshield, you have rear view mirrors and side view mirrors. There's a lot of information that you're seeing in all these different vantage points. If you were to take a kid who's learning how to drive and put him behind the wheel of the car, and then he drives down the street with his father who's teaching him how to drive, and that kid, not having a lot of experiences, really doesn't understand how to value things. Now, he may be getting some advice on, hey, make sure you watch this, look this, check your mirrors, so on and so forth. Basically, what the father's saying is, here's the important stuff. Make sure you do that. Chunk this together. But he's got a lot of things going on. The father, if he was driving, has been doing this for a long time. He understands what's important. People get so complacent or so good at it that he'll take up non-essential driving tasks like texting, talking on the phone, messing with the radio, stuff where the 16-year-old rightfully so should be, really doesn't want to do any of that stuff. Is kind of nervous, is like understanding that he's got a lot going on here, or to him, he's got a lot going on here. Someone who's a more experienced driver, they don't feel like they have a lot going on. In fact, I have so little going on, I'm going to read the paper as I'm driving to work. So what happens is someone's simplifying a complex series of things. As a 16-year-old looks out the window, looks out the windshield, he sees all the stuff going on, and his eyes may be drawn to like eye candy, whatever that is, something going on that is interesting but not important to what I'm doing here. And that's how 16-year-olds crash their cars.
Right.
The other side of it is someone who's more experienced may overestimate their ability to do things because they've done it for so long, and they've chunked things together so that they begin to add auxiliary tasks that are not part of driving, and they feel like they're capable of doing that.
Right.
And they can make a mistake in that regard as well. But something which doesn't change, in other words, driving down that road, the same stimulus for both people. And one person feels it's very simple, and the other person feels it's very complex. And it's how well they simplify this complex thing, how well they chunk, their estimates of their ability to do it in time, assessments and stuff. So it all gets back to really looking at the complexity for problem solving and how that affects things. If the listeners will get into like Hicks' law, where they looked at how a simple action, a simple stimulus and a response takes a certain amount of time. When we make the stimulus more complex, the response time increases. And so, it was like Hicks did it like light flashes, push a button. When that light flashes, push a button. And they would measure how long it took a person to do that. And then they would put two lights up. When the red light goes, push the button. When the blue light goes, don't.
And there are metrics on this stuff.
Yes. And they even found kind of pretty standard levels as the complexity grows to here. This is what we see in the human reaction time. The human reaction time is about 0.24 of a second, a little bit under a quarter of a second. And that's an average human reaction time for the species. But there are some people who are a little bit quicker, some people who are a little slower, age, health, and all that stuff can affect those things.
But for the most part, Hicks' law is saying the more complex, the more time it's going to take.
Absolutely.
So at an episode called The Science of Conflict, I hope you listeners understand, this is how things are won.
Yes.
This is how things are controlled, right? These are the parameters of performance.
Yes. And this is how we win.
This is how we win.
Understanding
I was trying to avoid saying that, but this is how we win.
Yes.
In basketball.
Yes. Yes.
And other sports.
Yeah.
Sports! Right? So with Hicks' law, we see that complexity. So looking at it from the opposite end then, which is when we get into chunking, it would serve us better to find ways to allow different skills in the endeavors that we find ourselves doing to overlap, right?
Yes.
One of the things, an application that I come into all the time with my fighters is you're throwing a hook, keep your rear hand up. Mm-hmm. And perfect stance, throw the hook, other hand drops down. Yeah. Or it stays there.
Yep.
And finding ways to piece these things together allows us to cover so many things at once.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much how you beat Hick's Law.
Right. Right.
I
And
don't know if beat it's the right word, but how we try to control as much as we can.
we simplify that which is complex to us, because complexity can be looked at objectively, and it also can be looked at subjectively. So the interesting thing is I can count the number of things that are involved here, but complexity also has a component of value, which is individual.
Right.
And so, yeah, there's 8 things here. Only 2 are important, by the way. And other guy might be like, oh no, all 8 important. All right, well you got 8 then, I got 2.
Right.
And that's the subjective side of it.
Right.
And if I can, we do this all the time in combat and combatives. We look at ways to handle stimulus with a given response, or feed a certain response that will branch into multiple stimuluses. So I can start this type of movement. I can end it 3 different ways. You don't know which one I'm going to be doing. So I can add complexity to your side and simplify my side.
Right.
And so we're constantly doing that as we begin to train. We're looking at simplifying what I need and making it more complex for him, because there's the other side of it.
Right.
And a lot of people always look at this as on their side, but we have to understand that the feeder loop drives the receiver loop. And how can I make it more complex for him, whether or not it's really complex?
Right.
Yeah. So that's a big part of it.
And we see in a lot of different things, people who have experience. If we're speaking in sports, we're talking about veterans.
Right.
Right. Like, what is the value of a veteran whose attributes may have
Yes.
lessened over time? They're looking at the 2 things, not the 8.
Right.
They have all this down.
Absolutely.
So they've found a way
Efficiency.
to make it as efficient, to simplify so many perceived complexities of lesser, players, participants.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
We see it in fighting all the time. We see it in boxing. We see it in wrestling. We see it in all this stuff. You see the old guy get in the ring with a younger guy.
So you remember that clip?
Oh yeah, it's great.
Everyone's seen that clip. That old dude's like in Europe somewhere.
Yep.
He whips the little party boy with the ponytail's ass.
Yes.
He's got like a sweater on. It's awesome.
Yeah. And we see that stuff all the time. If you wanted to look just at the complexity of the situation, you could have a guy who's in better shape, he's stronger, he has these attributes, he has all this stuff, and the older guy who knows 1 or 2 ways to nullify all that, and all of a sudden they don't count for anything.
Right.
And he can make this thing very simple. And that's like a lot of times the gaming of something. The strategy is to simplify what I have and make complex what he has to look at.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I remember for me, right, I'm about 280 pounds now. So as a grappler, me, 215, 220, I look like a gorilla, just running, jumping all over the place, and agility's high, and speed, endurance. But at 280, it ain't happening.
Right.
But when I roll now, I am really reduced to making sure I am constantly in touch with this process of simplifying complexity.
Yeah.
Because I can't beat the movements now. I have to control them. I have to prevent them.
Yes.
I have to put up, eye candy for the guy I'm rolling with, because I know I'm going to move into position while he's paying attention to the magic show.
Right.
Right.
And change the dynamics that you value as important. When I do any kind of fighting, being at 290 pounds and older, I don't do a lot of movement, but I understand that I'm hard to move. And so I create situations where that will become an advantage. And, I can hit heavy still. But so the thing is, can you change your game? If you took a guy who was 150 pounds and made him 350, would he be able to fight like a guy who's 350?
Right.
If you took a guy who's 350 and made him 150, would he be able to fight? The thing, he's still trying to bull people around. He's still trying to do this. You can't do that anymore.
Right.
And now you make the guy 150, you make him 350, and you go, listen, you can blast people off their feet, but your endurance is going to be this. And the thing is, I can remember fighting a lot of guys in the gym, and they'll be like, the loser always says, well, look at how big you are.
Right.
And I was like, well, look at how small you are.
Right.
Like, what's the difference?
Do you get to use your speed?
Right. Like, move around, like, do something. You want to stand toe to toe with me? That's a bad choice. Like, and so do they use what they have and understand what they have?
Right.
And, and that becomes part of the complexity, simplification, and all that stuff is also tied into that. So it's everything that comes with training and with strategy and tactics here can go back to how the loop is going to be used and how it's applied, both in training and application, both in fighting and in training to fight.
So I know a friend of yours. I have yet to meet him, Carrie Colat.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty decent wrestler, right?
Yeah, yes, pretty good.
Pretty good. Pennsylvania wrestler, right?
Yep.
He had some time off, and he came back.
Yeah.
When he came back, he was whooping asses.
Yeah.
And he was out for so long. He was older when he came back.
Yep.
Yet somehow he was still able to do it.
Right. And that's a great story. And the thing is, what was gained in his time off,
right,
and what was lost.
Right.
If he was to hold on to like what was lost, and that was what he was focusing on, I think it would be very unlikely. But that's not how Carrie works. He's always constantly evolving, constantly looking at what is he gaining all the time. He's not really, he's not focusing on losses except to learn from things.
He's a thinker.
He is.
And that's one of the things with him. My exposure to him was through his instructional clips that he puts up. And, I've been teaching for a long time. I've nowhere near accomplished, elite athletics like he has, in sport. He's an amazing competitive wrestler. But one of the things I do have a fair amount of pride in is in my ability to teach. Mm-hmm. And I noticed he has the sort of eye. He understands.
Yeah.
And when he speaks about a concept, you understand that he's speaking about something that he has a relationship with.
Yeah.
He's not regurgitating. He's not naming a move and then just do it like I do it.
Right.
Look at me, just do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so many teachers. I mean, that's why when we look at world champions, what I want to know is, okay, you were a world champion. That's great. You were this level. That's great. How many people have you made to the level of where you were or above?
Right.
And there's a lot, especially in the boxing world. And, coming from Philly and being around the boxing scene there for years, being trained by a world champion there, Robert Hines, I would look at the methods that these guys would use for transferring information.
Right.
And a lot of times they were great boxers and have no methods for transferring that information. Right. Maybe they don't even understand what made them great.
Right. Maybe
they don't know how to assess the person in front of them for having different traits. And that is something that's seen. There are so many, I would say there are more great athletes than there are great coaches.
Sure.
And but Carrie is definitely a great coach.
Right. Every once in a while you get the both. You get the Dan Gables.
Yes.
The now Cael Sandersons. And staying in the world of wrestling. And there's applications of that all over the place in every type of sport. In the military, you have great battlefield soldiers that have become great leaders. Great politicians.
And it can go the other way too, where there can be guys who were great teachers and never accomplished greatness when they were competing, or maybe even didn't compete at all, like on any level. But they understand what needs to happen, and they understand the concepts and principles to make someone great.
Right.
And you look at the guys who did box, but never were at the level of the people they create, the Angelo Dundees and the Customatos and that stuff. But so I hear also young fighters who are like, if you can't kick my ass, I'm not gonna train with you.
Right.
That's
stupid.
Right. Because if that guy can kick your ass, then what's he doing here?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
you?
Yeah. I have a shoulder that doesn't work, no ankles that work, like joints are, the thing is, I did enough stuff that I broke my body up when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
You better know how to teach, because that's what you're doing now.
Right.
That's what you're doing now.
So we've gotten a little off, but very valuable information. In the next hour, the second part, we're going to be talking about the Sayoc readiness formula.
Yeah.
You're going to be talking about your elements of conflict, and applying that to different areas of our lives.
Yeah.
Universals, a lot of universals that so many of us, I mean, if you're watching my podcast, you are somebody who, is interested in cultivating masculinity, tribe, establishing a relationship with violence. You've been watching the Warrior Continuum, the Loyalty Matrix. You'll see so many things that fit with so much of this information, because all of this information has played such a huge role in the way that I look at my life, the way I look at the things that I do in my endeavors. And you have been a tremendous component of that. Before we break, for the to conclude this, tell people what it is that you do, because you're not a guy. The thing that makes you different from a lot of the guests I have. I'm not sending people to read your latest book, watch your latest movie, buy your latest DVD. It's pretty much, just say goodbye. But what is it? You are the director of operations for Sayoc Tactical Group.
Yep.
And for those who have never heard what Sayoc Tactical Group does, why don't you explain that to them if you can? So
we provide training, tactical training, developing skills for warfighters. We primarily train, but anyone in the military we could provide training for, but it really is going to be more guys who are in specialized areas, who need specific training. And there's federal government law enforcement, a lot of different people from those areas that, once again, have specialized needs. We will work also with local law enforcement, and really in areas that would brush up against a military type mindset. So active shooters and very catastrophic type events, we can provide some insight to the training. We provide tactical role players, people who can give a very good look for, say, the bad guys. Mm. And so we do a lot of that. We really look at the science behind conflict quite a bit, the mindset components that are foundational. Once you understand these, your analysis of your training, or operationally your analysis, can go to a high level. We look at just decision making. We teach LOT, which is logical order of thought, directly from Pamanatuan Sayoc, who's the head of the Sayoc system, and how can we apply that decision making protocol for military operators. So we developed that as well.
You mean to tell me that Sayoc's just not a bunch of blade guys running around cutting people.
Yeah. No, it's there's quite a bit of thinking involved, and as Famanatuan Sayoc has said, you know, it's a thinking man's game. The smarter you are, the more dangerous you'll be.
Right.
The smarter you are, the more dangerous you'll be. And that's something that, you know, we open up a lot of our training with a little exercise, and we can do it for the viewers, is picture in your head, say the top 3 most dangerous people you know. These are the people that, man, I wouldn't want that guy on my bad side. You know, like I wouldn't want to be on the bad side of that guy, or I wouldn't want him after me, or this guy is very dangerous individual. Now, if you visualize who those people are, make the list in your head. It's probably no one is on that list because of how many push-ups they do or how much they deadlift. Like they may be strong. They may be in good shape and all that stuff, but that's not why they made that list.
Right.
There's other guys who are as strong as them or as good a shape as them. They're not on the list. What put them on the list is the way they think. Just everyone's got their own list in your head. Start analyzing it. What makes that guy dangerous is because of how he thinks. He's scary the way he goes about violence, right, the way he calculates things. Some people would say how devious they are, or that guy's going to get you. You don't know when, but he's going to get you if he's after you. Like that kind of stuff. It's not because of how big or strong he is. That they are just byproducts.
Right.
He may have made himself big and strong in order to do what he wants to do, but it's the way he thinks that makes him dangerous. So if our job is to become more lethal every day, and if we don't do that, we are failing as men. You're going to start with how you think. That's what's going to make you dangerous. You know, and then add whatever you want to that, all skills and all that stuff.
So we're going to end there because I know how you get.
Okay.
We got members that we got to take care of.
Right.
Yes, I'm doing that to you guys. That's right. We are here. We are now putting things behind the curtain. So, listeners up until now, I know you're not going to have any complaints. That was amazing, as I knew it would be. So thank you for watching. Just as a bookend, thepressureproject.com is our website. info@thepressureproject.com is our contact email. The Pressure Project Members is a membership site where you will find the second hour to this interview. But I appreciate you guys watching, and I will see you guys in the next episode. The rest of you guys, the members, stop behind the curtain and let's finish this talk.